the Reality Reckoning Vanity Fair article, it focuses a lot about how these productions handle alcohol and where the responsibility lies between the producer and the on-screen talent and the business itself. Dylan, Sandy, did you guys read this?
Yeah, I mean, it just came out today, so I did manage to read it quickly before the recording. I knew it was coming out, so I've been kind of looking forward to it dropping, and was happy to use one of my free articles with Vanity Fair to read it. But I thought it was pretty interesting. It was like, I mean, there's probably isn't a ton of new information for anybody who's been following this stuff. It's more like a lot of things that we already knew gathered together to make a case, but some things were kind of new that were interesting to me and helped like me see some things in a different light. Like a lot of it focuses on Leah from her time with New York too. And I thought that was really interesting. Like we did cover the Ultimate Girls Trip that she was on, which is discussed in the article, because there was a thing in that where she talks on camera about feeling like she wishes she was there when her grandmother was dying in the hospital, and felt like that she was under pressure to film in the Hamptons when she was doing New York, even though she wasn't explicitly told that she had to do that. And I remember the way it was framed in the show that we got was kind of that Leah is being kind of ridiculous and like placing her guilt on the show, where there's like, she's no business blaming the show for that when they never explicitly did anything wrong. And I think when we talked about that on our show, I think I even like expressed that perspective. Like it's hard to see what Leah's even mad about here. But then in this article, we get what was really interesting for me is that they say that Heather did a confessional talking about that, where Heather, who is, obviously spent a lot of time thinking about, her separation from the Mormon church and how she has all these like internalized pressures that she puts on herself, and like trying to break free from like, internalized rules. And apparently Heather said like, if I was in the situation Leah was in, they wouldn't have needed to say anything. With the idea like they wouldn't have to explicitly tell me that we need you to be in the Hamptons instead of being with your grandmother. Like I would have forced myself to do it. And they didn't include that confessional in the show that they gave us. They did include multiple confessionals of people calling Leah ridiculous for like blaming the production. So that just was interesting, just in terms of thinking about how we get these like layers of reality in reality TV. And that's one of the things that's artistically interesting about it. It's like, oh, this is what's presented as reality, and this is the more real side behind it. But looking at it as a workplace, as an employer, and then when you see it as seeing these people's lives filtered through multiple layers of reality, the show, then there's the confessionals, and there's the reunion, there's Watch What Happens Live, there's BravoCon, and all of it is really being curated and presented by the employer, by the same employer. Then you start to see why this is a problematic situation too, because we're thinking of the reality and the behind the scene stuff and what's actually real, all coming through the employer's perspective. And I thought that was an interesting insight into how that works, and why it's you could see why that's kind of part of the things that are problematic about how these shows are being made and marketed.
Yeah, totally. And there's also there's a power imbalance, like any employer-employee relationship that is there. And it was, it is good that they took it upon themselves, even if it was in the wake of knowing that this article was going to come out, but to like put some guidelines in place. But I think that, there are some voices that are like, oh, good, they're addressing this, but it's not enough to just like have the employer be the one that is, responsible for putting these guidelines in place, and like leave it up to them to sort of self-manage that. It's essential that you codify these in some way that's either like legally through like actual legislation, or through some sort of collective bargaining
Mhm.
agreement within contracts, because that is a whole nother level of protection. And I don't think that there's enough, like, you can't just fully rely on your trust in your employer in order to feel safe, you know being like, oh well, there's guidelines and rules that are there to protect me, but those are all enforced by someone that has, or an organization that has its own best interests in mind, and they're not like won through collective bargaining or negotiations, or through like lobbying to get laws in place.
Yeah, that's why Bethany's right. They do need a union. Like
Yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
unions are for. Like it's one thing for them for Bravo to be able to say like, oh, we provide resources. Yeah, but you provide it on your own terms, and there's no recourse if the resources aren't there when you need them. Like if we recall back to Rachel's interview with Bethany, and she was saying that she says that she was told that there was going to be like a mental health professional on set during the reunion, and when she went there wasn't one. So that just shows how, like, if there was like actual codified protections, you wouldn't
Mhm.
just be relying on what they say they are going to do, or their generosity, or what they happen to do at the
Yeah.
minute, instead of just
Mhm.
letting them say, oh, we will make somebody available if we can, or whatever. If there's
Mhm.
nothing preventing them from not holding up their end of the bargain, because there is no
Yeah.
Yeah.
bargain.
Probably
S
easy for them to treat them like disposable staff too when there's a lot of turnover,
Well,
at
yeah. And I think
right?
that's something you get in the article too, is just the way that people internalize this feeling of owing a lot to Bravo, because they're afraid that
Right.
they won't get their contract renewed. They won't be brought back for the next season.
Did you
They won't get to do Ultimate Girls Trip, which was dangled in front of them as a possibility.
right. Did you read the line, if you go to the whorehouse, you're gonna get fucked?
yeah.
Right.
That was actually an interesting like thing that got
Take?
brought up in the article, where they're talking about how they kind of dangled that carrot in front of Leah about,
Uh,
come on to Real Housewives Ultimate Girls Trip, and then we'll get you on Legacy. Because I remember it was not too long ago, even just like a couple weeks ago, there was all these like rumors going around that Leah was going to be joining the cast of Real Housewives of New York next season, um, which I don't know that there's any like teeth to that. But as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, I wonder if they were kind of dangling, a new season of uh, Real Housewives of New York in front of Leah, to try to negotiate some silence, because they knew that this article was coming out, and she is featured. She's probably the most heavily featured in this article out of all of the housewife experiences that they talk about. So it definitely seemed like, oh, that might have been something they were trying to like bargain for in order to kind of take some of the sting out of this article. But what were your thoughts, Sandy, on this article?
I only read maybe half of it. Didn't have time, but I have a question. I have a question for you guys. If they unionize, which is certainly fair from a labor perspective, how will that affect our product that we enjoy? How do you think that will
mhm.
affect it, if at all? I guess.
Yeah, I think my opinion is that it shouldn't have like a huge effect, because I think that it is fun to watch them be drunk and destructive. But I think one thing that you said when you were on the show before, when we were watching like Aaron's event, that was kind of like a medium disaster, there is a lot of like small stakes, like petty arguing, and just things that are on a whole not fully destructive, that really give a lot of tension. And it's a lot. One of the things that I appreciate about reality TV is the fact that it's able to tell stories at like a variety of different scales. So there's like stories that have like very like low stakes. There's just like mild annoyances that kind of build up over time, and fizzle out or come to a blowout. And then there's also these big, like, life changing momentum or momentous occasions that get chronicled, and we see how that impacts a character over, a long term. And I don't think that protections for the people that are in front of the camera would hinder that to the extent that, you might be fearful of just like looking at it kind of from the outset. I think it definitely would probably change the product a little bit, but the product is already changing and it's constantly changing. So I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think
I don't
one thing that
really.
you've, oh, sorry. I'm just going to say, like, one thing you've talked about, Craig, is how people are obviously strategizing and playing, this game to get a leg up, and people don't always know if they're going to be a housewife or a friend of, and all of that. And I don't know what, like, the stability of a union would do to some of that desperation that fuels it, which, like, Bethany talks about a lot, right? That kill or be killed, whatever. And it sounds so terrible to say, like, I want to keep that, but that's sort of where I'm thinking, like, will it make it all just a baking show or something? I don't know, but it all evolves, like you said, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, like, I feel like the way that most of these shows, maybe Below Deck being the exception, is that this cast, you might not know whether you're going to be a full, like, housewife or friend of, but you're kind of, that you're going to be on the show for a season. And I think as long as, like, contracts are still negotiated on a season by season basis, there still would be that element, because that kind of sport to this is something that is very compelling. And to see people try to position themselves within, like, the edit, I don't think we need to lose that as a result of this. I think we'll find different ways that will, like, come out of the evolution in the format. But yeah, I think that's definitely, like, a valid concern.
Yeah, I don't think that it would affect the content that much. I don't see why it would. That would have to be something to worry about too much. Like, I think you could have the union situation be very similar to, like, what athletes have. Like, there are unions for athletes in their sport. Those athletes still have to fight for a spot on the roster. Like, it doesn't guarantee them a spot on the roster. They still have to earn it and fight for it, but they get certain protections. If their contracts are terminated, their healthcare has to be guaranteed and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be something like, oh, you've got tenure now on the housewife show.
Yeah.
And these women want to put in a show too. That's why they're there. So I don't think it would be like, oh, we're now cozier in our job. So we're just, like, going to put in a boring show. Like, they, as much as the producers, want to put on a show. I think I think you can do that, and you can have the show the producers want and the show that the performers want, with just a little bit more protection, and a little bit more protection that's legally guaranteed and not just at the discretion of the employer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of you guys get any sort of, like, insights into how the sausage is made from this article that were surprising in any way?
Yeah. Their thing that they said, what do they call it? Like hot notes or something, where producers will, like, hold up a phone with, like, huge letters
big
that
words,
will.
yeah.
That I did not know that. That would be like, bring up her drinking problem or something.
Yeah.
Just hold up, like, a little flashcard on their phone that says that. That was something I didn't know. That was pretty interesting to me.
That was something that I had not heard of and didn't realize was done. It was very interesting to see that, but also the idea of the producer sending out, like, these beat sheets to everyone prior to the shooting to kind of say, where things are at and what they would ideally, like, talk about. That was a lot more in line with what I had expected the process surrounding reality TV to look like, in terms of the hand that a producer had, as well as, like, one-on-one conversations with producers. I thought one thing that was very interesting about that whole like, sort of seeing the process was how much agency the reality TV personalities had in terms of how they interacted with producers, because there was the story from the former like Real Housewives of New York producer that was brought on for a single season with Ebony,
Mm-hmm.
um, that like Ramona and Luann were able to just like ignore her and not return her calls or talk to her at all. They just like
Yeah.
froze her out basically, um, which I didn't think was a thing that would be, you know, possible or acceptable in, you know, in the course of production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Just seeing that a bit about like her interactions with the cast, and also how like she like kind of apparently bonded with Ebony over the experience too, because they both kind of had, well, notably Ramona being kind of racist to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Not just
but
kind of like just
definitely
very
being absolutely racist to
yeah.
them. Yeah. Was an interesting window into the way that the relationships between the producers and the stars.
Yeah. On a whole, what do you think like there will be any sort of reverberations from this article coming out?
I mean, I'm sure Bravo will continue to announce like more measures that they're bringing in, whether they're like actual real things or just like PR statements. Beyond that, I don't know.
Yeah. Was it as damning as you guys thought this article was going to be?
No. Well, I mean, nothing like really explosive and new in the sense that a lot of these things were, I think, the worst things, like Ramona being racist. Oh, did anything happen on your guys' end?
Nope.
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So for some reason, my page seemed to refresh, but it just didn't really. Sorry. I'll start that again. I guess nothing seemed really explosively damning or in like a new way. The worst things, like Ramona being racist, Leah kind of feeling pressured into starting drinking again. These were kind of things that we knew about already. I think the strength in it is just kind of putting it all together and make one consistent story out of it, which I think was well done by Anna Peel, the writer. But not an explosive new revelation, just kind of more like a summary of things that we knew, to paint a portrait of an industry that has some things that need to be corrected.
Yeah. Sandy, what about you? Did was this kind of what you were expecting?
I think so. I honestly still have to finish it, but no, I think what Dylan said. It's always interesting to read these and get these little nuggets of new information and have it put together in a cohesive narrative, and it really does paint a picture. And as I said, I think for me, like, maybe this speaks to the half of the article I got to read, but it really does make me sort of think about the exploitation around alcohol, and it makes me uncomfortable because of how much I actually do enjoy that part of the show. Like, of course there are other parts of it. I think most people have a challenged relationship with alcohol, and I think that's a lot more prominent in the sort of social narrative these days. A lot of people are stepping away from it or thinking about it more critically, and I think it's going to happen. It needs to happen. It needs to be thought about, how much we're relying on this really harmful drug, I guess, especially if it's being pushed, or people are being exploited with using that. So that is something that's on my mind, and how I interact with these shows, and what I'm interested in getting out of them, and how that relates to my own, I don't know, relationship with it.
Yeah, I think that the first half of it is like completely focused on how alcohol is used as kind of a tool of the trade here, which is definitely like no surprise. And I feel like Bravo has kind of preemptively responded to that. Like, it seems like there's an uptick in housewives that have been cast that are sober, like on the New York reboot specifically, which is a shed production, because that's where the the focus of the article was surrounding Leah and her relationship with alcohol mostly. So it seems like they have like taken measures to I guess kind of diversify the type of um, the type of spark that they are getting for these housewives. Like, not all of it is coming from
Mm-hmm.
being a messy or compelling drunk. So
Yeah.
I think it definitely would probably make the job of a casting producer a bit more difficult, but I think that some of the best housewives that we have seen, like new housewives that we have seen, are sober. Like, I think Uba
Yeah.
was great and
She's the
fun to
weirdest
watch.
one on that show, and she doesn't need to
Yeah.
drink to be weird.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Gina, like, got sober, and I thought that she had a fantastic season, although I think I'm probably in the minority of people that feel that way, just gauging the temperature on the fan sentiment surrounding her. But I thought that she was great. I think it's it definitely is more challenging, but I don't think it's impossible.
No, I agree.